Hey everyone, welcome back to 996 to Howl. Now, one of these years, a video like this will matter to the Coyotes because they'll be competing in the division. But yet again, hopefully maybe one more year, Coyotes will probably, most likely, 99% finish last in the division. There's still one other team in the division that might compete for that last place spot. But we got to look at, the other teams in the Coyotes division. This is the second year the Coyotes will be in the Central Division. Used to be in the Pacific. They had that weird Honda division where they were playing their division teams like 8 times in that one shortened season. So this past season, we were already getting, used to getting back to only playing divisional rivals 3 or 4 times a year. Much different from the 8 times per year in 2021. But it still doesn't feel like the Coyotes are part of the group just yet. Maybe the Nashville games looked a bit, rivalrish. We had that play-in series a couple of years ago. It's always a feisty game against Nashville. Some of the other teams maybe not, but hopefully rivalries do bud and do become more competitive with the Coyotes. So let's get into it. This is mostly in the order I think the division will finish up. But after writing everything down, I think I might put Nashville ahead of Minnesota. Just looking at the Nashville additions, looking at Minnesota's goalie tandem, I think they might, go on a bit of a skid this year. Obviously, they won't miss the playoffs. I think they got a lot of young talent to keep them in the playoffs, but maybe drop out of the top 3. I really like what Nashville did, even though I really don't like Nashville's coach. But we'll get into it. So I think Colorado will still win the division, but they did lose a lot of talent. But I still think they have the best defensive core in the league. You got Makar, Byram, Gerard, who missed most of the playoffs due to an injury. Then you have Manson still there. They still keep Lehkonen from the trade deadline. They do lose, however, Kemper, Kadri, Burakovsky, Jack Johnson, Nico Sturm, and Albert Kubel. So a lot of depth scoring there they lose, and their number 1 goalie. Some might say that Kemper didn't even matter for winning the cup, but I would put Kemper above Georgiev, but I like Francouz. I think this is going to be a year where Francouz becomes a starter for the Avalanche. And Georgiev could be good too. Don't know too much about him. I know he was on the Rangers, always in trade talks with some other teams. But, I think the Avalanche are well coached. They got a dynamic top 6 and one of the best top 6. They lost a lot of depth, so that could be troubling. Defense, like I said, top in the league. Goalie tandem could be a bit better, but I think Francouz is ready to get that starter position. So I'll keep Colorado first, but I could easily see St. Louis grabbing the number 1 spot. But the troubling thing for St. Louis for me is that they lost their backup or 1B goalie in Husso to Detroit, and they acquired Greiss instead. I was thinking Greiss would have came back to Arizona. Greiss had terrible numbers last year in Detroit, so surprised St. Louis went to go get him, considering they want to be a contender and be top 3 in the division. They got some depth guys in Highmore and Noel Achari, who I liked and hoped the Coyotes would have acquired. They lost Perron, like I said, Husso, Tyler Bozak, McEachern, like a 4th-line checking guy. James Neal, I totally forgot he was on the Blues. I think he only played a handful of games for the Blues last season. But they got some good upcoming rookies. They played a couple of NHL games already in Neighbors and Peronovich. They're highly touted rookies, and they should be, filling in the spots for Perron. And Peronovich, I believe, is a defenseman, should fill in the spot there. I like St. Louis. I like how they're coached. They've been on a roll ever since they fired Mike Yeo and won the Stanley Cup. So you can never discount really good coaching, and that's why I favor St. Louis ahead of Nashville, because I really don't like Nashville's coach. But the St. Louis center depth is unbelievable. You got O'Reilly, Robert Thomas, Braden Shen, and now Noel Achari. You got Kyrou in the mix. Their defense is pretty good. Krug, Falk. I believe they re-signed Letty, pretty sure. So pretty good. That's why I put St. Louis over Minnesota. I don't like Minnesota's center depth. We'll jump into Minnesota. Their center depth is Eriksson Ek, Ryan Hartman, Frederick Goudreau, and Rossi. Rossi is going to be an exciting young rookie, paired with Kalen Addison. Kalen Addison's on defense. I shouldn't have said paired, but Rossi will be a forward. I should have said paired with Boldy, who played a lot of NHL games last season. He was a rookie last year, won't be a rookie this year, but Rosso and Boldy will be their new exciting forwards, along with Kaprizov. Addison comes in on the back end. But, Minnesota did lose Fiala. They lost Cam Talbot to Ottawa. Jordy Ben, Bukestad went to the Coyotes. Delorier, depth, fourth line checker, hard worker. And they just traded Kulikov to the Ducks. They replaced Talbot with Gustafsson from Ottawa, who I don't think is good. I also don't like Marc-Andre Fleury. I think he's at the end of his... I thought he's been at his end of his career for a really long time now. The fact that he's still doing all right, he was traded from Chicago to Minnesota at the trade deadline, sort of took him to a good playoff series with St. Louis. They ultimately lost, but they didn't replace Fiala. They're also cap strapped with a bunch of retention or cap hits from the Parise buyout and a Ryan Suter buyout or Sutter. So they couldn't really add much. That's why they got a kind of cheap goalie in Gustafsson. They got some depth guys in Patan, Sam Steele, who I thought would have been a good player, but he's been struggling on the Ducks. So maybe he performs well in Minnesota. And then Suster on the back end. We'll see what happens with Minnesota. Like I said, I also think they're well coached, just like St. Louis. Dean Evison, ever since he was named head coach for the Wild, they've just been an elite team, a well-coached team, good forward core, good defensive core. They had good goaltending with Talbot. Like I said, I really don't like Fleury. I think this season might be it for him, and it will show, and he doesn't even have a good backup in Gustafsson to take the load off Fleury. So this might be a bit of a downward trajectory for the Wild, but, I will probably be wrong. Moving on, we got Nashville, who added a lot of good players, and they didn't really lose much. They got Niederreiter from Carolina. I love Niederreiter. He's always on the score sheet. He's just a point production machine. They got Ryan McDonough from Tampa. They got Lankinen, who was a young goalie in Chicago. So they got a UC Saros and Lankinen goalie tandem, which I like better than either Binnington and Grice and Fleury and Gustafsson. So Nashville might have the best goalie tandem. Yeah, best goalie tandem in the Central Division. So I think they might finish top 3. Maybe I was too lazy to redo the board to put Nashville in third. They got Sanford for some depth and Jankowski for depth as well. They only lost Nick Cousins, Kunin, and David Rittich. So they upgraded their goalie tandem. I remember when Saros got injured near the end of last season, they had to rely on Ingram and Rittich, and none of them were up to par. None of them could carry the team. I think they did pretty bad against the Avalanche in the playoffs. So, maybe they're looking for a rebound. We'll see if Duchesne could have another bounce back year. Their main goal for this offseason was re-signing Philip Forsberg. So they ended up re-signing Forsberg. So that's good. They got him locked up. So we'll see. Maybe we see Nashville come back and be a consistent playoff contender like they were a couple years back. But most recently, they've been treading water a bit, not fully committing to a rebuild, and for sure not right now. They're not committing to a rebuild. So they're going to keep going for it. They still got that great defensive core with Yotes and some other young guys, Ekholm, I believe. So they could still be a dangerous team in the Central. Moving on to Dallas, like the Predators, their main focus for this offseason was re-signing Ottinger, which they did. Their goalie, who was unbelievable in the playoffs against the Flames. And then they still haven't signed Robertson, who's a good young player who I think he scored 40 goals. So they still need to re-sign him. I believe they'll get it done. He's their best young player. Dallas has that mix of a young, up-and-coming core of players, but they still have the veterans in Ben and Sagan there. Radulov finally leaving the Dallas Stars. They also lost Klingberg, which they couldn't afford to keep, so that's a bit of a hit on the back end, but they got Heiskanen, who just pretty much replaced Klingberg as soon as he entered the NHL. They lose Holtby. I believe Holtby's retiring, so they have an Ottinger, I don't even know who their other goalie is. Ottinger and someone else, probably bad, is their tandem. It might have been Riddick, and I forgot to put it down. But they got Marchment from Florida, who people are kind of hyped about. Maybe a third line guy could help out Dallas, but they didn't really add much. Colin Miller and Butcher. They lose Raffle, Nemestikov, Sekera. So they also fired their coach, and they got a new coach in Pete DeBoer, who I'm okay with. I think a lot of people are down on DeBoer and hate him a lot, but he does well. Like, he took San Jose to a cup final, took New Jersey to a cup final, did all right in Vegas. You can't really, show up Gerard Gallant and going into the finals in the first year. So he did an all right job with Vegas. I think with DeBoer, I think has pretty good first, second seasons, and his time runs out and everyone just starts complaining about him. But I think DeBoer is definitely an upgrade over Bowness, who went to Winnipeg. So we'll see with Dallas. I think there'll be a wild card team. Oh, Scott Wedgwood. Obviously, I forget Wedgwood. Wedgwood is their backup to Ottinger. So yeah, that tandem, I guess they're just hoping Ottinger, keeps up that formula in the playoffs. Because if you rely on Wedgwood, when Wedgwood leaves the Coyotes, it's usually a bad sign, and he doesn't have good years, like when he went back to New Jersey after the Coyotes. So we'll see what happens with Wedgwood over there. Like I said, Winnipeg, they get David Rittich as their backup to Hellebuck, but they hire Rick Bowness from the Dallas Stars. They move on from Paul Maurice. They also get Sam Gagner and Kyle Capobianco. Their additions are really bad. The only three names are Gagner, Capobianco, and David Rittich. So Winnipeg did not add at all. They lost Paul Stastny, Eric Comrie, who was a pretty good backup to Hellebuck. Comrie went to Buffalo. They lose Evgeny Svechnikov, not Andrei Svechnikov. And they lose Zach Sanford. But they got a good young guy in Perfetti, who played a handful of games last season for Winnipeg. So look to him to be that new young player on the Jets. The Jets, it's basically those 6 or 7 guys. Scheifele, Ehlers, Wheeler, Hellebuck, Morrissey, Connor. Those are the guys. Like, if they all go all cylinders, Winnipeg might compete for a wild card spot, but they got no depth after that. And, Hellebuck, he could only carry the load so much. So Winnipeg, honestly, this should have been a year where they just go scorched earth. They could have got so many good picks for those guys I just mentioned. Each one of those guys could, demand for sure a first round pick, but maybe 2, maybe a first round pick and a top line prospect. Each of those players I mentioned are unbelievable. It's just that they don't have a really good supporting cast. They're not well coached with Bowness but behind the bench. Hellebuck could only do so much. So Winnipeg would have been a good candidate to join Chicago in the Bedard sweepstakes. But they're still going for it. Maybe this is the last year they go for it, and then reality will hit them in the head. Then we move on to Chicago, which I was blindsided by. I did not see this coming. A scorched earth rebuild, just like the Coyotes, just immediately on draft day, trading DeBrincat to Ottawa, trading Doc to Montreal. They didn't need to in this past draft. They could have done that in the 2023 draft, where it's supposedly better. They could get better odds for Bedard. There's a lot of good centermen in the next draft. So they had DeBrincat for 1 more year. And Doc was an RFA. They could have signed for 1 more year. So they could have held on just for 1 year. And then trade everyone for high draft picks in a stronger draft. Don't really like the draft picks they picked up for DeBrincat and Doc. They also lost Strome, Kubalik, Lankinen, who was their young goaltender, went to Nashville. DeHaan, D'Elia, their other young goalie, and Brett Connolly. So their tandem going in is Peter Mrazek and Stalock. So that's competing for one of the worst tandems in the league next to the Coyotes, where it's Vejmelka and right now John Gillies. So I honestly think Bill Armstrong's waiting until training camp finishes, when teams finalize their rosters and put some goalies on the waiver wire. That's where Bill Armstrong's going to get his backup, because John Gillies is an atrocious goaltender to be back up to Vejmelka, who's already overworked, and his load needs to be managed much better than what it was last season. They also got Max Domi, Athanasiou, some good young speedy guys, but they lost way too much. This is a pure tank job to compete with the Coyotes. They got a depth guy in Colin Blackwell and Jack Johnson from the Avalanche. I think right now, it'll be the Coyotes, Chicago, San Jose, Philadelphia in the sweepstakes for the top lottery pick. I feel like Montreal improved way too much. They got Kirby Dach. They got Monahan. They're going to play Slavkovsky for sure. He's NHL ready. Just feel like, last year Montreal had so many injuries. They had a terrible coach for half the season, and they didn't have Jake Allen. This year they won't have Price again, but hopefully Jake Allen plays better. I just think they improved too much to compete for the basement. I think San Jose is ripe to start falling hard. They had a pretty bad season last year. They didn't improve this offseason at all. Philadelphia's, they got a good coach in John Tortorella. I don't think it's a good mix right now for Philly. Just their makeup of the team seems poor to me, but you never know. Tortorella, he had a good couple of years with Columbus, bringing them to the playoffs, so maybe he works his magic there. But the East is really competitive. A lot of bad teams last season improved a lot. Like Ottawa improved, Detroit, Buffalo improved, New Jersey. They cannot tank again. They've had so many first overall picks, second overall picks. They had so many high draft picks. Their fans are ready to compete. I just don't see them in the bottom five. I think, the Coyotes, Chicago, San Jose, Philly, maybe someone else. Seattle even upgraded too in the offseason. So I don't think there'll be too many, but I think as the season goes on, teams will realize that they don't have a shot at the playoffs. Maybe a team like Winnipeg, and they just sell everything hard. And then the last half of the season, they just tank. That's probably going to happen with such a high-profile guy in Bedard, projected to go number 1 overall in the draft. So this is how it will play out. Coyotes, again, last place. Might be the last year they do this. I'll have season previews, my expectations for the team later on in September. But, right now, the Central Division isn't really a bloodbath. A lot of these teams lost a lot of good players. So, maybe in the next couple of years, the Coyotes, it won't be too hard to leapfrog some of these teams. You might see some teams go into a rebuild, like Winnipeg, maybe a retool like Dallas or Minnesota. Minnesota, they don't have much cap room. They don't have the depth like St. Louis and Colorado. Maybe something happens there. But, St. Louis, the Avalanche, they're pretty good teams, well-coached, elite teams. So they'll probably lead the division. And then, we'll see what happens. I'm excited when we play these teams. It's a measuring stick when we play these teams. Most of the time, we get blown out. But hopefully we can make those games a bit more competitive this season. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.